What is up, guys? Wrestling Premiere is here. The WWE roster grew exponentially throughout the years of 2012 to 2015, and it also meant fewer opportunities for new and established stars. I like the Attitude Era style of show, but WWE didn't fulfill the potential of that idea, seeing as SmackDown was full of replays and tag team matches. You watch one SmackDown, you watched all of them. It's crazy how stacked the roster was, yet the shows were dull. I have good memories of 2015, but that's nostalgia talking, so whenever I hear someone be like, 2015 was a great year, I just turn sideways. I'm like, actually? Plus, I was loving the matches, but storyline-wise, WWE wasn't doing too well in that regard. The advent of NXT meant that a strong focus was on the new stars. They were churning out plenty of talent until 2016, when the WWE roster became bloated. There was so much going on and so many talent that were getting lost in the shuffle. It was best for the future to establish a new brand split with their own titles. WWE didn't bother trying out the one world title or tag title concept like they used to. They went straight for the branded belts. Raw and SmackDown were once again split, with each show getting a set of talent. Raw did get the cruiserweights as an additional package, seeing as the show's 3 hours, and when we look back on it, this brand split was hyped like crazy. It was a hard reset which the WWE needed if they wanted to keep this great roster. You can't just hoard talent and do nothing. A strong focus of the brand split was about the WWE Championship initially. The title was considered the golden prize for both brands, and they were going to do everything in their power to bring the title to said show. And the effort was there for the shows. Both Raw and SmackDown had new intros, presentation all around it, and unlike now, there was a huge cultural difference between both shows. You had a different vibe between them. For one, Raw felt like the now, the guys that were going to seize the opportunity in their primes and at their best, whereas SmackDown was full of veterans and very young talent, much younger than those on Raw. Mick Foley was the Raw general manager, and Stephanie McMahon was the commissioner of the show. The commentary, of course, featured Michael Cole, but he was also joined by Byron Saxton and the debuting Corey Graves. Corey Graves in his early days was like a breath of fresh air. I heard so much good from him during this time period, but that would fade away. I remember people were likening him to Bobby the Brain Heenan, and this would sound like the most outrageous thing in history I've said today. You guys know the SpongeBob sound effects when they turn their eyes like, that's how you would react if you heard this right now. But back then, he was only a year into commentary and sounded like a veteran. It's still on my mind how ridiculous that was to be said. One aspect of Raw that was interesting at the time was the new camera angles. Raw had these cool ass angles with the drones and post-match interviews. It was tiny, and yes, half of the interviews would go south, but it did so much to establish that this show was much different to what it was previously. New theme songs for Raw. They had this bumper theme for the woman called Dreams That I Have. Stories of Greatness is another one, which is very nostalgic if you actually go listen to it. It'll take you back to 2016-17. You'll be thinking about all the storylines in no time. And of course, the main theme song of the show, Enemies by Shinedown, which of course fit in line with this gritty new era of Raw. And coupled with that industrial identity, it made for great visuals and sounds. That sounds like a ChatGPT sentence, but to put it simply, Raw was well aligned when it came to the image of its show. What about the characters and stories? Well, the lower card was the big weak spot of this show compared to SmackDown. I personally believe that if a lower card prospers, it bodes well for the rest of the show because people are already tuning in for the big stars. But if these guys who aren't challenging for titles and losing constantly involved in a revolving door of stories, it's never a bad thing. They did that Heath Slater free agent story with him constantly getting his ass beat. What is this? This is an injustice. Then he'd turn around and take a big boot or something. At one point, he tried to reunite 3MB only to get turned down by the returning Jinder Mahal, who stole the contract under him. No honor among thieves. In Jinder, he didn't really do much. I remember he was associated with Rusev for a moment. The Shining Stars were constantly promoting the good district of Puerto Rico, and I actually do understand their obsession with promoting the place. I'm actually inclined to visit. R-Truth and Goldust were doing some things, but all in all, it's impossible to have a long discussion about the lower card scene because it didn't involve much. I almost forgot. Darren Young was doing this Make Darren Young Great Again thing, which wasn't much. Bob Backlund was by his side screaming, yeah, we're gonna do Darren Young. He's gonna be the star. We're gonna make him great again, or something like that. And it's like they did a random generator and suddenly landed on this of all things. Who knows, maybe if they spin the wheel again, we'd get Truth and Backlund, although that sounds better than this. And I almost forgot about this while I was working on this video. Titus O'Neil was the most lower card guy out of all of these guys. There's this one episode of Raw where they gave him the mic and he just spoke about how the primetime players sucked. He was the real star of the team, and it's one of the worst promos you'll ever watch. Listen, Titus O'Neil, he ain't so bad when it comes to backstage interviews and stuff like that. But putting him on a live microphone on Monday Night Raw, which is the flagship show of the World Wrestling Entertainment, WWE, it's like making a toddler cross the street. They might get past it, probably, but chances are they're gonna get run over. And that's what happened here. Who scripted this? This doesn't sound real. He's complaining, yapping, stuttering over his words, and I'm thinking to myself, bro, surely they know his ability. It's like they wanted to feed him to the wolves because of the whole ladies first incident from February with Vince. I don't know. What's the quote again? Whether it be one of them broke brothers from Bush Bushwick or one of them ippity hipsters from Williamsburg. We're drifting far away, but it's that funny. It really is. It's just one of those. In some ways, the 24/7 championship could have been utilized here. I actually think it would have gone down better if it was brought in 2016. Everything was fresh and it was a chance to do new things alongside that freshness of Monday Night Raw. One guy that seemed like he would get lost in the shuffle with the brand split was Braun Strowman. Strowman was a part of the Wyatt family and we didn't know much about him. His character wasn't as fleshed out as Rowan and especially Harper. And naturally, you'd expect him to be the typical big guy, but he slowly became a notable part of the show, and from out of nowhere, you were seeing him face the top talent. Strowman had the skill, his size was incredibly vast compared to the rest of the guys, and he actually had more charisma than he had shown previously. Every week, he'd smash some enhancement talent into dust, growl, then this made its way to the bigger talent. And Strowman offered more than squash matches. He did so well for himself that he was feuding with Roman Reigns by the time that this iteration of the brand split ended, and he was over. He was one of the most over wrestlers on the entire Raw roster. We could sum it up with one quote: "I'm not finished with you." Memorable moment. Strowman, you really looked like a future star of the WWE. The tag team division is one that I personally feel should have gone down better. SmackDown's was just way more interesting, but here on Raw, they still had the New Day who were nearing a potential record-setting tag title reign. The trio were still having great matches and all, but it felt like the ideas were disappearing after constantly winning. It was tough to reinvent the wheel, but at the same time, WWE really wanted them to break the demolition record, while at the same time, giving this incredible team a memorable achievement. The Good Brothers honestly didn't interest me at all, and I hate to say it because they have great personalities outside the ring, but anytime they came out, I skipped the show. And that's because I wasn't watching Raw live. Come to think about it, the July 25th, 2016 episode is probably the only episode I didn't skip a second of, and I'll talk about that later. Enzo and Cass were massively popular, and for good reason. You know, they'd be coming out, loads of charisma from one of the guys. Big Cass was basically like Billy Gunn. Enzo was the most charismatic character on Raw. He'd sell like a champ, especially if he was up against a bigger opponent. Brock Lesnar sent him to the 6th layer of hell where he started hearing whatever by Our Lady Peace blaring for some reason. It cannot be overstated just how much it was entertaining to see him thrown around like a ragdoll. Even though he's a face, you see some segment and think, it's not exactly uncalled for. Like, this guy was trying to get with Lana, and this segment was one where everyone thought, oh, WWE TV 14, oh my god. It was never coming. Until you see Lana becoming pregnant with a member of the roster not named Rusev, then we could talk. Although they were pretty close to doing that with the Bobby Lashley story. This segment was so good. Rusev obliterated this guy, and I wouldn't even say he bitched him. He just murdered him, ate him for dinner, and sent him on his ass outside to the hotel room. It was embarrassing. And I'll talk about Rusev in a little, but with Enzo and Cass, you couldn't help but think that the heat Enzo had affected their push because there's almost no reason for them to not challenge for the tag team titles as seriously as the other competitors. Overall, I think the tag team division needed some more pizzazz, and one of my favorite additions to the tag division was a mid-card rivalry turned tag team, Sheamus and Cesaro. These two at the time were considered the type of guys that were 2 wins away from the world title. Cesaro was that Bond character, although unfortunately, he didn't have much of a character. But he was a great performer, and 2016 is probably his best year in the company. Maybe 15. Sheamus was champion not long ago, although with the way he fell down the card, you'd think it was an alternate universe. And I just want to take this time to trash the League of Nations. It sounds like a summit of political leaders, and I don't rate everyone in the group, but there's no reason that they could have been a dominant force. Instead, Roman Reigns cooked them 1-on-1, 3-on-1, 5-on-1, and the group just flat out became the League of Channel Changers. But anyways, Sheamus and Cesaro had a great best of 7 series. It's hard to pull off, but they did. And even though the reward was a world title shot, neither man won the final match, and they were forced to coexist. Ha! Tried trope, right? Well, it sounds like a tried and repetitive story. The way they did it this time around was a bit different. They already got the crowd invested in both men with their big matches. Both guys started to respect each other for their performances, and thus, the bar at a bar with Tessa Blanchard and others was created. They were actually the ones who ended the New Day's long title reign, and all in all, that was probably the best thing to happen to the tag team division, which is the bar becoming a tag team. So the tag title division did have talent by the end of it, but I don't think it squeezed all they could out of the lemon like SmackDown, because SmackDown had less talent but still pulled off more from the Usos and American Alpha. And a new tag team would be added to the Raw roster right at the end, the Hardy Boys. One of the most surprising moments of the 2010s. I remember I skipped through WrestleMania a little only to see Matt and Jeff Hardy, and I was stunned. I'm like, what the hell, they're back? It was odd. It was just flat out weird to see him in that era of WWE, in that ring with WrestleMania 33. All that was just strange. It took some time to get used to it. With the huge success of the Cruiserweight Classic, WWE brought back the Cruiserweights and gave them a spot on Raw. And unfortunately, that novelty of the Cruiserweights disappeared. With the tournament, they wrestled to the best of their ability and had a you had to be there vibe. Full Sail was going insane on a weekly basis with that tournament, and to me, it's top 10 best things that the WWE did in the past decade. It was so perfect. 10 out of 10. And I don't, listen, I'm not throwing 10 out of 10s out there often. Nor am I some figure of authority where it's like, if you hear my opinion, it matters, all that. But personally, the Cruiserweight Classic was was a 10 out of 10. Now, all that was missing were certain cruiserweights, but those guys couldn't make it for different reasons. With this version, the 205 guys had their own show on Tuesday and some moments on Raw. Some of it was good, but it wasn't fleshed out and felt like it couldn't be its own thing. If I had to explain it simply, you couldn't immerse yourself into the cruiserweight world as you did with the classic. 205 Live though, you can, but on Raw, not so much. Noam Dar constantly talking about Alicia Fox will always be a memorable moment for me, but I liked Rich Swann at the time. TJ Perkins makes me turn the other way when he does that dab. If it's not Paul Pogba, I don't want to see you doing a dab, and even then I kind of cringe at it. Tozawa, Menelik were great talent, but ultimately the 205 thing faded. But then came Neville, and Neville wasn't really doing much, but him turning heel and becoming this huge bully in the division was much needed. They even involved Austin Aries, an old name of the past, a guy I forgot exists unfortunately in Neville's title run. So yeah, I think 205 Live had good matches, but I just wasn't invested in it personally. As it relates to the whole thing, I feel like a major issue with the 205 Live guys is that while they were cruiserweights, they didn't interact a lot with the other guys on the roster or try to wrestle them or stuff like that. And for me personally, not talking about you guys, I think that kind of affects my enjoyment of it. Raw's mid-card scene is very interesting because it was filled with talent that weren't mid-card. The only guy who was around the mid-card scene that was a full-on mid-carder was Rusev, and you could add Sami Zayn. Rusev in particular was a guy who they didn't know what to do with after his big push 2 years ago. He was getting thrown around by Roman Reigns and got his title taken away from him. They were trying to do this great reset with the Reigns, which they couldn't fully follow through with. And all I remember at this point is Rusev with this distinctive beard, always angry for some stupid mid-card reason. Typical. He was talented, but that push to actually get him over was never going to materialize. With Sami Zayn, he was doing much better, even without the title. I really loved Zayn at the time because his underdog thing was fresh on the main roster, and with these actual multi-time champions, it had the potential to top that NXT story. He had this story where he was obsessed with beating Braun Strowman, but every week fell onto his ass. Even then, it didn't stop him. Week after week, he was trying his best, and he did win a match against him, but that's based on lasting the 10-minute time limit. And there was also this hilarious segment where Mick Foley said he traded Zayn to SmackDown for Eva Marie. All that work in your career only to be compared with Eva Marie, who, no offense to her, probably didn't know what the letters WWE stood for. It was a ploy by Foley to motivate him, but that moment really stood out for me from this era of Raw. We traded you for Eva Marie. And then Zayn turns to a Karen, or for WWE's purposes, a Stephanie McMahon. He's doing all the facial expressions and redefined the word dramatic. It was more than that. He was more angry as opposed to entitled after I rewatched it. But yeah, the mid-card scene was actually dry. I wouldn't even say dry. It was actually empty for the most part because the US title was used for the main eventers. The women's division of Raw was dominated by 4 names. Sasha Banks, actually WWE doesn't want me to start this sentence like this. It was dominated by Charlotte Flair, Sasha Banks, Bayley, and Nia Jax. The core of this division was the Charlotte and Banks feud. At times, this was the best thing on Raw. They had plenty of good matches, and while some might see hot potato with the title, I see it as 2 tremendous athletes getting the best of the other on any given day. Now, if it was them trading titles with half the roster, then yes, I understand. Sasha and Charlotte had this chip on their shoulder to be a defining feud of that decade, and you saw it in their performances. That first Raw of the new era featured a wonderful match between them, and it also boded well for the future of the division. It felt like it was in more than good hands. But the issue with this is that it also set a precedent for Sasha Banks. She never had an actual title reign during this entire time. Not a single one as long as Charlotte's, and we know the bookers love heel champions, but Sasha never even tested other challengers, and that's the issue with it. They had the first women's Hell in a Cell match, which delivered, Iron Women's match, but the one match that will always stand out was the one on the November 28, 2016 episode of Raw. A full-on war between both women to prove who was the best in the WWE. One big issue I had with this feud is that Ric Flair and Charlotte's relationship took up a big part of it, and it was so bad. It's so dumb. Like, if they were gonna do this, they could have done some elaborate setup. It wasn't even like Flair faked all of this for his daughter. She just disowned him and was supposed to feel massive on their part. Oh my god, the daughter's betraying him. But it's like, oh, okay. Flair's crying for the 17,000th time. It's about to reach his divorce number, but it's not a big deal. Like, it wasn't special. Who cares? Nia Jax was pushed decently in NXT, but then they took things further here, making her the destroyer of the Raw brand. She was mostly doing her own thing until the winter, when they started turning her into a bigger deal, but her real push wouldn't come until a year later. You guys remember when Dana Brooke used to be with Charlotte? Oh, and what about the Emelina teasers? They were teasing those for weeks on end before having her actually return and revert to Emma. Bizarre stuff. They didn't have any plans, if I remember correctly. The biggest disappointment in the women's division was unfortunately Bayley. Signs that this character wasn't going to work as her NXT run were becoming apparent. Her character wasn't presented in the best way, and she bombed on the mic, which wasn't going to bode well for her future. Even then, she had a huge moment in February of 2017, winning the Raw Women's Championship. Feel good moment, you deserve it, all that stuff, but that title reign didn't fulfill its potential. Regardless though, Bayley did walk out of WrestleMania as champion, but then the superstar shakeup brought Alexa Bliss, who basically killed the Hugger character. The main event scene was dominated by 4 men: Kevin Owens, Chris Jericho, Roman Reigns, and Seth Rollins. The funny part about these four is that they were also trying to go after the United States Championship. The brand split though in the beginning had a much different idea about the main event scene. Finn Balor was a first round pick. Back then he was a big deal coming out of NXT. WWE valued him from his work as Prince Devitt in New Japan and made him the name and face of NXT. To this day, if you ask me about the history of NXT, the first name I will think of is Finn Balor. He comes in and gets this huge push. Roman was in the doghouse for some enhancement drugs, I believe, and they made him lose to Balor clean and pushed him straight to the Universal Championship. Remember the reaction from the fans to the belt? It was horrible. Balor had a US government-style missile strapped onto him, and on his most famous night, he also suffered an injury that changed the trajectory of his career. I really hate it for him because he had the brand down, the leader of Balor Club, the Demon King who would show up from time to time as a way of intimidating his opponent and also motivating himself. He had it. But a regular move in Rollins' arsenal proved to be the reason why Balor is in the position he's in now. Would they have de-pushed him afterwards? Probably. I don't know. But you don't think to yourself that this injury caused a long-term effect on his career? That's exactly what happened to Dolph Ziggler. The buckle bomb is a bit notorious. Its positioning does look dangerous. Sting, Finn himself, that they suffered long-term injuries from, and WWE banned it after Nia Jax was suspected to injure Kyrie with the move. She didn't injure her, but they saw the effects and fears of what the move brings with their own eyes once more. And the last thing I would want is for Nia Jax, remember the name Nia Jax, to use that move of all moves in her moveset. If you give Nia Jax in 2020 the buckle bomb, it's like giving a Chicago gang rocket launchers. What do you think is gonna happen? Finn Balor is in the history books as the first Universal Champion, but nobody knows what would have been of the title reign and his career. I do believe he would have done way better in the WWE and been positioned similarly to Seth Rollins. A title match for the vacant title was held the following week, and this match had long-term effects on the Raw brand and its stories for the next 6 months. Triple H made his return here for the first time since WrestleMania 32, I believe, and turned on Seth Rollins. This led to him giving the title win to Kevin Owens. It was a huge moment at the time. I was shocked. I was stunned. But then Triple H decided to do the famous disappear from Monday Night Football method. It's a great method. When you come back after the Rumble, the ratings go up anyways because fans stop watching football seeing as it's playoffs, and you could come in and waltz in and be like, you're the reason why the ratings went up. Great method. Owens' title reign was a typical coward champion who's scared. He did have some great matches with the likes of Seth Rollins and Roman Reigns. The Cell match is a gem, and that last man standing match turns out it wasn't a last man standing match. I'm mistaking it with the other one. This no DQ match with Roman Reigns is one of the best matches in both men's career, but the title reign wasn't good. I'd be lying if I said it was good. However, there was something to watch, and that was the incredible dynamics with Kevin Owens and Chris Jericho. Jericho experienced yet another career resurgence. He became entitled again, complaining all the time while wearing a silly scarf and some dazzled jacket. It felt like Jericho built up his own delusional world, and when anyone caused issues, what the hell, I'm losing my voice, he'd put them on a list. It made for great TV, and at times Kevin Owens and Chris Jericho were carrying the show hard. It's a weird paradox where Owens was entertaining, but his title reign wasn't good. And I think a big issue with the title reign is that it wasn't presented like the NXT would. Once they presented it like that, he dropped the title to Goldberg, and their feud lost the heat that it had. It didn't need the title, but I almost believe that if the Universal Championship was on the line, then they probably would have had a better match at WrestleMania. That match was so deflating. It was second on the show and it lasted for about 16 minutes. It's so long, and you forget the good work these two did in the build to their feud. Especially that moment where Owens puts Jericho on his list. Very underwhelming for what was at least a top 2 build for WrestleMania 33. Brock Lesnar's Raw time wasn't as prolific as the other guys. He just shows up, throws a random lower card guy like Heath Slater around, and does it with confidence. The Randy Orton thing was disappointing, and it almost felt like Shane McMahon was going to be his opponent for WrestleMania 33. But a new plan was in motion, and it was much bigger than the boy wonder, Bill Goldberg. Now this is very funny because WWE wanted to make right by Goldberg's side and treat him like the star he was a few years ago. And by a few years, I'm referring to WCW. Goldberg was old, but the interest was real, and this is the issue. The wrestlers look like fanboys when Goldberg comes around. It's sad, but that's the advantage of becoming a star in the Attitude Era. They had this big storyline where Brock Lesnar is demolished and just can't get past Goldberg. It was well done and makes you forget about their other encounter. But WWE decided to give them the world title, and it's unfortunate because this feud did not need a title to it at all. And even then, it would feel big time. You know, it felt like a huge rematch, and WWE did a lot to make this feel like a big deal. And then that WrestleMania match delivered. I still don't get why Goldberg complains to this day. They gave him a red carpet return, practically got on their knees for him, yet he still feels like they should do more with him. You can't even do more with yourself after a 3-minute match. Huffing and puffing of exhaustion after hitting 3.2 moves. And the point 2 is because he botched move number 4, so he can't exactly put a full number to it. But regardless of that, this run was a great way to close Goldberg's career. It felt like he was leaving with dignity and some sort of honor, although Bret Hart might slap me for using honor and Goldberg in the same sentence, but there was something there. You know, they're clapping, they're happy. It's like, this is a great way to close your career. This ended up leading to the Brock Lesnar reign of terror, one of the darkest times in Raw's history, and one that personally made me stop watching the WWE for a time. I was still watching it on YouTube, but I wasn't exactly watching the episodes. I was watching clips, and when you're watching clips, you're practically out. Now back to Seth Rollins. Rollins was my favorite on Raw at the time, only because Balor was injured, and I really liked the story of him showing remorse and regretting the fact that he betrayed his Shield brothers. But it felt like from August to WrestleMania, his character was at a pause because he needed Triple H to unpause his game. And to put it simply, he had good matches, but his face turn wasn't as smooth as I remember it. Triple H turned on him and he was left to deal with his face turn, but the game was the key to unlock Rollins' face turn. So he had to buy time. And this is a WrestleMania feud, so I understand why they dragged it, but I would be lying if I said Rollins didn't struggle without Triple H. I think he did a good job putting over Rollins with the knee story, adding Samoa Joe as an obstacle in the way for him, and of course the match. It was a bit long, but I enjoyed it at the time. Rollins came out of it primed for something big, but he had to wait some time. And we have to mention the number one guy who wasn't the number one guy throughout the year. Roman Reigns. It felt like 2016 was prime Roman hate, although 2018 does give it a fight. The big dog was fresh off a suspension, and instead of going straight for the big title, they actually had him go after the US title. Reigns was just casually strolling around. Everyone knew he would eventually go after the big one, and the fans got word he'd actually win after Reigns dropped the US title. I think many of us were convinced. Then they had him enter number 30 in the Royal Rumble, which was hilarious. I remember people were thinking that Kenny Omega was actually showing up. You hear that Shield music and people want to jump out of a window. Just thinking about it now makes me laugh. The Undertaker was ending his career and he wanted Roman to do the honors. Their match didn't feel as big as WWE wanted it to be because the streak was over, and unlike the previous year, there's no huge incentive for Undertaker to beat Roman. Then the match was just a sad watch, although I've been hearing some decent stuff about it recently. I have to give it another chance to look at it from different lenses. Roman retired the Undertaker, and the crowd reaction that next night was magical. They wanted his head, they wanted to kill him. The guy had the most heat in the entire company, and he wasn't even a heel. That was the moment to do it, but clearly WWE had their vision of Roman, and nothing was going to change that. But if there's a natural time for the heel turn to go down, it was here. Now overall, Raw 2016 to me is a missed opportunity. I'm not gonna let the nostalgia lie to me. SmackDown, on the other hand, I remember every single episode, watching everything. It was such an easy watch. With Raw, they had the tools, they had the talent. Like Kevin Owens' title reign was entertaining, but it wasn't a good run. I feel they're spinning in one corner for no reason when they could have done much more. There was some good stuff on it. I just feel like Raw was a bit disjointed compared to SmackDown. Even if you made Raw 2 hours, I don't think it would have been as good as SmackDown. One of the only episodes I actually watched in full at the time was the first episode. That's the only episode I believe from that time period that I didn't skip a single thing from it. But yeah, there's some good stuff in here. I just feel like SmackDown, whatever they were doing at the time, was just much better. So yeah. Alright, what you guys think of Raw 2016-17? Please comment down below. And that's it for this video. Make sure to spear on the like button or perhaps the pop-up power bomb and the subscribe button. Peace. I'm out.